on call, and I take Indian economy for the Titan and the Pinnacle batches in the English medium. This is the second chapter in our series of videos covering previous year's question papers related to the Indian economy. Now, the previous part has already been discussed. You may find the link in the playlist where we have discussed previous 10 years question papers. Up until now, we have covered money, we have covered money supply, we have covered banking as well as RBI or central banking. Today, we'll start with part 2 of the discussion. Hello everyone on YouTube. Muskan everyone. Today, we will start with a discussion on inflation. Just a moment. Money market, inflation, yeah. Now, this is what we are going to be starting with. Questions based out of inflation. For us to solve questions based on inflation, the only one thing we should always keep in our mind is that inflation has to be understood as more money chasing fewer goods. Now, whatever causes more money to exist or whatever causes fewer goods to exist or both at the same time is going to create an inflationary environment. Now, let's look at the questions as have been asked previously. This is one of the most important parts of previous year's question papers, and these are questions, hardly a few of which you will find will be related to knowledge or information. Most of these questions will be applied questions. Now, let's pick the first one or the most recent one. The question says, which one of the following is likely to be the most inflationary in effect? Now, mind you, every time you read a previous year's question paper, every time you're attempting a UPSC previous year question, you have to be very careful while reading the question. The question says, which of the following is likely to be the most inflationary in its effect? That means you may find a few options which could be inflationary. You will have to pick one which is the most inflationary of all. Now, inflation as we understand it to be, inflation is very simple. Inflation is, like I said, just remember it like this: more money chasing fewer goods. That means there can be a problem from the demand side, there can be a problem from the supply side. Anything can cause an inflation. Let's evaluate these options. One more thing, one more tip that I have for you all is whenever you're solving a previous year question, please go with a negative approach. Don't try to think which of these is the correct answer. Always read a statement and think why this should not be the correct answer. Right? The one option for which you have the least number of reasons to believe that this is not correct or this is possibly not incorrect, those options will be normally the right ones. First one says repayment of public debt. Now, public debt, you can understand it simply to be the debt owed by the government to entities outside of itself. Is repayment of public debt going to be inflationary? You can imagine that debt gets created internally, debt gets created externally, but debt gets created from the existing money. That means households, even corporates for that matter, or financial institutions for that matter, they have their money. This money can go into a pool of savings, and it is from this pool of savings that eventually other entities borrow money from. That means if the government has borrowed money from internal or external sources, when it repays that money, quite obviously it is putting liquidity into the hands of people, which could be inflationary. B says borrowing from the public to finance a budget deficit. That means the government is making more expenditure than it has receipts to show for. If the government plans to make more expenditure while its sources of income are not enough, in which case the government may have to finance the deficit by borrowing the money. Now, is borrowing going to make it inflationary? It can make it inflationary provided that people had money idly left at home. They put that money into banks and government borrowed this money from the banks, which it normally does not do. Right? Government may have issued securities to the people and the people subscribed to those securities, gave that money away to the government is going to spend this money. Now, because you borrow to spend instantly. Nobody borrows because they want to invest that borrowed money. Everybody wants to borrow because they want to spend that money. So you can imagine that this saving that people did not require at this point in time will be used by government because this money would be spent. Quite obviously, this could also be inflationary. C says borrowing from the banks to finance a budget deficit. Now borrowing from internal sources, or we can say borrowing directly from the market, borrowing from banks, the effect would be one or more or less the same. The last option says creation of new money to finance a budget deficit. This is what you call debt monetization. Debt monetization means that the government plans to make expenditure and this expenditure is far greater than the receipts of the government. That means the government requires extra money. There is a deficit situation with the government. This deficit will be financed by getting the RBI to print new money. Now, previously all the three options, this is money which is being borrowed from the existing money supply. When you look at option D, in option D, not only is existing money supply going to be there, you are now creating more money. You are adding to the money supply, right, by creating new money. Now, of all of these, many of these could be inflationary, but the most inflationary has to be option D. Why? Because option D is where you are adding to the existing money supply by printing new currency. That means there is going to be more money chasing fewer goods. Right? Now, one thing you have to imagine, like I said, is the inflationary. You will have to pick which one is comparatively the most inflationary. Printing new currency is going to be most inflationary. Why? Because you are adding to the existing money supply. Right? That means there will be far more money chasing fewer goods. This is the answer. We'll move to the next question. The next one says, which of the following steps is most likely to be taken at the time of an economic recession? Now, an economic recession commonly understood as a decline in output. When the economy's output is declining, we say that the economy has entered a contractionary or a recessionary phase. Now, in case of a recession, the existing policy instruments, which could be at the disposal of either the government or that of the RBI, is called the fiscal policy and monetary policy, respectively. In case of a recession, what has to be done is that you have to revive what is called aggregate demand. And aggregate demand is comprised of consumption expenditure, investment expenditure, government's expenditure, and net of exports. So in times of a recession, you want to increase the output. How will you increase the output? You will first raise the aggregate demand, and through this aggregate demand, there will be some amount of trickle down which will happen. You will create new output, in the process giving people employment, putting money into the hands of people so that they will demand further more things, putting this economy back into what is called a virtuous cycle. Now, which of these essentially will have an impact in terms of increasing the aggregate demand? This is what you have to figure out. First one says cut in tax rates accompanied by an increase in interest rate. Now, cut in tax rates is going to put more money into the hands of people because people's disposable income is then going to rise. Cut in tax rates is also going to put more money into the hands of corporates because the government also taxes the corporates. So if we have reduced the tax rates, that means people's disposable income is now more. But it does not say only cut in tax rates, it also says accompanied by an increase in interest rates. Now, when you say we are increasing the interest rate, that means you are going to increase the cost of borrowing. And if you increase the cost of borrowing, quite obviously, both the firms as well as the government would find it hard to borrow money when the cost of borrowing is higher. So, on the one hand, you're trying to increase the aggregate demand. But by having an increase in tax rates, you are also reducing the aggregate demand. Increasing tax rates, why? Because it is going to increase the cost of borrowing for the economic agents. So is A the option? No. B says increase in expenditure on public projects. Now, increase in expenditure on public projects is primarily going to come from the government itself. That means we are trying to rake up this part. Increase in public expenditure is going to happen because G has risen. Now, if G rises, quite obviously the aggregate demand rises and you may be able to pull back the economy from a recession. In fact, this is what Keynesian principles talk about, that in times of a recession, you do not expect private individuals, private firms to revive the aggregate demand because the situation is one that of a doomsday. Nobody is very hopeful about what is going to happen to the economy, in which case the government has to step in, and the government either should increase its expenditure or the government should reduce taxes, or the government could do both at the same time, so that you put more money into the hands of commoners, into the hands of firms, into the hands of consumers, right? You give them employment also and you put more money into their hands, make them revive the aggregate demand. So this is quite likely an option. C says increase in tax rates accompanied by a reduction of interest rates. Now, if you increase the tax rates, that means consumers will have less money or less disposable income. You are being charged a 10% today, tomorrow they will charge you a 30%. That means you will be left with less disposable income in your hands. Not only you, but also the firms will have less disposable incomes from their profits because the government is going to take a greater proportion of their profits away, leaving lesser money for them to invest furthermore. Although the government may accompany this with a reduction in interest rate, but once again, you are taking or you are giving one incentive on one hand, but you are creating another disincentive on the next hand. So that means C is also not likely an option. D says reduction of expenditure on public projects. That means you are trying to reduce G. If you try to reduce G, the aggregate demand should decline. That means the obvious answer to this question is option B. Very simple to understand. Let's move to the next question. The next one says, with reference to the Indian economy, demand pull inflation can be caused or increased by which of the following? Now, demand pull inflation, right? This is a macroeconomic situation where you have price levels on the y-axis and you have output on the x-axis. This is going to be the aggregate demand and this is the aggregate supply. Demand pull inflation basically means that you have shifted the aggregate demand curve to the right, creating a new equilibrium price level, PL1, PL2. PL2 is greater than PL1. This is called inflation. Now, what can cause the aggregate demand curve to shift to the right? You have to pick which of these options. First one says expansionary policies. Now, expansionary policies could be fiscal policies, they could even be monetary policies. Expansionary policies mean that you are trying to expand the output of the economy. In context of the RBI, expansionary policies would mean creating a cheap money regime, creating a regime where the interest rates are low, cost of borrowing is low, so that firms, individuals, governments can borrow more money and invest this money, right, to create employment, to create jobs, putting incomes into the hands of people, pull the economy out of a recession. Expansionary policies, can they increase inflation? Yes, expansionary policies can shift the aggregate demand curve to the right. In these questions, wherever you have combinations of options, the correct way of going through these questions is to find the obviously wrong choice. Which of these is the obviously wrong choice, right, which cannot create a demand pull inflation? Fiscal stimulus is a scenario where you are reducing the tax rates and at the same time you are also increasing public expenditure, which is also expansionary in nature. That means in case of a fiscal stimulus, expenditure of the government has risen. Since you have cut the tax rates, C will also rise and I will also rise. That means AD is going to shift to the right. Inflation indexing of wages, higher purchasing power, rising interest rates. Of all of these options, look at option 5. Option 5 says rising interest rates. Rising interest rates could mean that the borrowing rates are also high. If the borrowing rates increase, that means governments, households, and even firms will find it more expensive to borrow. This is a dear money regime. And if these people or these agents find it more expensive to borrow, quite obviously the borrowing that will happen will be lesser. So rising interest rates, is it going to pull the aggregate demand curve to the right or push it to the left? It is going to push it to the left. It is going to be deflationary in nature. That means wherever you find 5, you eliminate those options. This goes, this goes, this goes. Your answer is A, which is 1, 2, and 3. In these questions, kindly, whenever you have a combination of options, your best shot of getting this question right is to find the obviously wrong choice here and use that choice to eliminate other options and get to the right answer. This is the skill of elimination. You will only get better at it if you solve more and more previous year's UPSC questions or even questions asked by UPSC for other exams. That way you'll understand what kind of questions UPSC asks you. The next one says, consider the following statements. Which of these statements are correct? First one says the weightage of food in consumer price index is higher than that in the wholesale price index. Now, even commonsensically, consumer price index is an index of inflation built to reflect the price level or price rise or price decline faced by the average consumer. In CPI, you have a representative consumer in your mind and you assign weightage to different categories based on their family budget or what share of their incomes or their budget goes towards what category of items. Quite obviously, if you're talking about an average consumer compared to a wholesaler, quite obviously an average consumer is going to be spending a greater proportion of their income on food compared to a wholesaler. So the first option, although it's an option of information, you should know this ideally because inflation is a very, very important topic, right? In CPI, the weightage of food is roughly around 46%, while in WPI, the weightage of food is somewhere around 26%. You have something called CFPI, Consumer Food Price Inflation. You have something called WFPI, Wholesale Food Price Inflation. It is that food prices or food articles are included in both CPI as well as WPI, but even commonsensically, if you have to think about it, quite obviously an average consumer is going to spend a greater proportion of their incomes towards food articles, so this should naturally be right. Like I said, in these particular kinds of questions, you have to find the statement which is obviously wrong. The second one says, the WPI does not capture changes in prices of services, which the CPI does, which makes absolute sense because in services, we say that services are inherently local in nature. Services are consumed the moment they are produced. There is no way you can store a service for it to be sold later on. There is no wholesale stage in the sale or in the trade of a service. Quite obviously, because services cannot have a wholesale stage in their particular trade. Therefore, the WPI does not capture sale in services, which is the correct statement. The third one says the RBI has now adopted WPI as its key measure of inflation and to decide on changing key policy rates. Now, after the advent of the Monetary Policy Committee, right, we said that the monetary policy framework is going to work with the objective of inflation targeting alongside growth. And in terms of which kind of inflation are we going to be targeting? If you think about it logically, why would the RBI pick WPI as an index for inflation? Why not pick an index for inflation which basically reflects the reality for an average consumer? The inflation targeting which is done has kept CPI, not WPI, as a measure of inflation, right? Not WPI, CPI. Even commonsensically, it should strike you that why would RBI keep WPI as a key measure of inflation? So 3 is obviously wrong. You use 3 to eliminate. That means your choices now are 1 and 2 only and 2 only. That means 2 definitely is correct. You only have to check whether 1 is correct or not. And we know that 1 is correct. The answer is A. Now remember, whenever you are solving these questions, please try to count the number of questions where you are able to eliminate 2 options. And if you are able to eliminate 2 options, please attempt those questions too. At the end of the session, count the number of those questions where you could eliminate 2 options. You were left between, let's say, an A or C or an A or D, but you attempted the question. Right? You picked any one of those two and then eventually ask of yourself, how many of those questions did you get right? How many of those questions did you get wrong? Please do this calculation because it's very, very important. Move to the next one. Which of the following brings out the consumer price index number for industrial workers? We have multiple kinds of consumer price indices. We have what is called the general consumer price index, CPI, all India, CPI rural, CPI urban. We have CPI rural labor. We have CPI agricultural labor. We have CPI industrial worker. All of these indices are brought out by the Ministry of Labor and Employment. The bureau that brings it out is called the Labor Bureau. It's a statement of information because CPI, WPI is such an important topic in your studies. You will obviously know this answer if you are going for, or if you're going to be a little serious attempting for this particular exam. Very, very simple question because this is something that most people will know. Move to the next one. With reference to inflation in India, which of the following statements is correct? First one says, controlling the inflation in India is the responsibility of the government of India only. Like I said, government of India has at its disposal what is called fiscal policy, which essentially deals with two things, taxation and expenditure. In context of an inflation, you have to create a scenario where there is less money chasing more goods, right? So there is a role of the government that the government can play, right? In case of an inflation, the government is going to follow a contractionary fiscal policy, which is going to be, of course, counter-cyclical also, right? But is it the only responsibility of the government? Government also has at its disposal administrative steps. For example, the Essential Commodities Act, which could sometimes be used to control prices for certain essential commodities. But is it the sole prerogative of the government? We just discussed that the Monetary Policy Committee said that the monetary policy framework in India is going to work with the objective of inflation targeting alongside growth. So it's not just the government, but also the RBI, which is keeping inflation in check. So is it the responsibility of the government of India only? It's an extreme statement. Can't be right. B says the Reserve Bank of India has no role in controlling the inflation. Once again, the Reserve Bank of India is going to work with inflation targeting as the monetary policy objective alongside growth. Decreased money circulation helps in controlling inflation. Like I said, inflation is very simply more money, fewer goods. So how do you control inflation? You attack this side or you attack this side. If there is more money chasing fewer goods, you create a scenario where there is lesser money in circulation. That means decreased money circulation helps in controlling inflation. Very simple. Increased money circulation helps in controlling inflation. Why would you put more money in circulation when there is already more money chasing fewer goods? The answer clearly is C. Very, very simple question. Move to the next one. The next target segment for us is the money market. Let's look at the questions which have been asked previously. First one says, with reference to the Indian economy, collateral borrowing and lending obligations, also called CBLOs, are the instruments of which market? Now, CBLOs essentially are, you can say, market transactions which very much resemble what are called repo transactions. Repo transactions are such transactions where there exists a repurchase obligation. In a repo transaction, what happens is party A wants funds from party B. So what does party A do? Party A pledges some securities with party B, while party B gives to party A some funds. The moment party A pledges the funds to party B, it also undertakes simultaneously a repurchase obligation of buying these securities back at a future date and at a future price. This is a generic type of transaction in money markets, which is called a repo transaction. CBLO is very much like a repo transaction wherein party A is going to offer a collateral of some securities alongside a repurchase obligation of buying these securities back in exchange for funds. But in case of a CBLO, the difference between a CBLO and a repo transaction would be a repo transaction is only going to be maturing when the term of the transaction is over. It can be an overnight repo operation. 7-day repo operation, 14 days, 28 days. Now there is also something called the LTROs. A repo transaction will, you can say, mature only after that time period is over. Under CBLO, you can buy these securities back or repurchase them back even before the maturity time period is over. So CBLO is a very, you can say, unique type of a repo transaction only, which is being brought to India by what is called the CCIL, Clearing Corporation of India Limited, which is a depository and also a subsidiary of the RBI. What market does it belong to? It belongs to the money market. It's a money market instrument. Now let's look at the next one. Consider the following statements in respect of the digital rupee. First one says, it is sovereign currency issued by the Reserve Bank of India in alignment with its monetary policy. Now, digital rupee essentially is the digital or digitized format of what we call rupee, which is our currency. Is it sovereign currency? Yes, because it's issued by the RBI, it is a sovereign currency. Remember, we have to look for the obviously wrong statement. B says it appears as a liability on the RBI's balance sheet. Quite obviously, RBI is printing this currency, although this is going to appear in a digital format, but much like your paper currency or your metal coins, it is going to be a liability on the Reserve Bank of India only, because it's the RBI which promises to give you the value as has been written on that particular note. So much like normal currency is the liability of the RBI, digital rupee, which is also a formalized, digitized form of currency, will also be a liability of the RBI. 3 says it is insured against inflation by its very design. Now, how can digital rupee be insured against inflation against its very design or by its very design? How can you design a rupee or how can you design a currency in a manner that it will not become inflationary? It is not in the hands of the currency itself that it is going to make it inflationary or not. Right? Digital rupee, or you can say paper currency or metal coins, they are not protected against inflation by their very design. Inflation is caused by either more money in circulation or by fewer goods in circulation. There is nothing in the design of the digital rupee which can automatically protect it against inflation. So 3 is the obviously wrong option. You use 3 to eliminate your options. Wherever you find 3, which is only B. Which of these statements are correct? That means the answer lies between A, C and D. D says it is freely convertible against commercial bank money or cash. Quite obviously, because it is issued by the RBI, you can exchange it, convert it into, you can say, physical money or physical cash. So 1, 2 and 4 are correct. The answer has to be option D. Let's pick the next one. Consider the following statements. Other things remaining unchanged, ceteris paribus, market demand for a good might increase if. What can cause the market demand of a good to increase? Now you should know that if the price of a substitute increases, what are substitute goods? Substitute goods A and B will be called substitute goods if they you can say have the same use or they have similar uses. That means one can be replaced by the other. Tea can be replaced by coffee. Pepsi can be replaced by Coca-Cola. 5-star can be replaced by dairy milk. Right? Rice could be replaced by wheat for that matter. Goods which either have the same function or same use or have similar uses can be replaced or substituted one for the other. Now, if you have two goods and the price of a substitute rises, that means you can imagine that there is Coca-Cola, there is Pepsi, both of them at 40 rupees per liter. The price of the substitute of Coca-Cola rises. That means, let's say Pepsi goes from 40 to 45. Right? Would this not automatically shift people who are the consumers of Pepsi to start consuming Coke because they believe that Coke also functions the same or also has the same uses? This is called substitution effect. Substitution effect determines the extent to which the price rise of a commodity pushes the consumer towards its substitutes. He's saying market demand of a good might increase if the price of its substitute rises. That means if we are imagining, let's say, market demand for Coca-Cola, if the price of Pepsi increases, many people are going to switch over from Pepsi to Coca-Cola. So the market demand for Pepsi, for Coca-Cola will increase. So this is okay. Price of its complement increases. Now, complementary goods are those goods whose use is associated with each other or who depend on each other for them to be used. For example, petrol and cars. Both are complementary goods. If we are talking about the market demand for cars, if somehow the prices of petrol start to rise, quite obviously for a good chunk of people, it may be more expensive to buy a car which operates on a petrol engine. That means if the price of a complement rises, the demand for car should decrease because it is now going to be more expensive for you to drive a car, drive a petrol engine car. So if the price of a complement increases, does the market demand increase or decrease? It should decrease. That means you pick 2, right? Wherever you find 2, you eliminate those options. That means the answer lies in 1 and 4, 1, 3 and 4. That means 1 and 4 are correct. You have to check for 3. 3 says the good is an inferior good and the income of the consumer increases. What is an inferior good? An inferior good versus a normal good, these are pairs. Inferior good is one which you will consume if your incomes are less. You will consume more of a good when your incomes are less. For example, if you are making some incomes, you may want to go to a restaurant and eat a pizza, right? The day you decide to quit your job, right? That means you are working on a budget. There will be very few times you will buy a pizza. You may switch over to a cheaper alternative, which is going to be called, let's say, a Maggi. So Maggi is something that you will eat more when you have less incomes. The moment you have more incomes, you may switch over to a Korean ramen. You may switch over to a pizza. Normal goods are those goods which you will consume more if your incomes are high, right? And inferior goods are those goods which you will consume more if your incomes are low. He's saying the market demand of a good might increase if this good is an inferior good and the income of the consumer increases. Because the income of the consumer has increased, quite obviously he is going to consume less of an inferior good, not more. An inferior good by definition is one which you will consume more if your incomes are high. That means 3 could also be used. 3 is wrong. Can't be C. The option has to be A, which is 1 and 4. Its price falls. Now this is the law of demand, which is that the prices of a commodity are inversely related to the quantity demanded. If the price increases, quantity demanded should decrease. And if the price decreases, quantity demanded should normally increase. We'll move to the next one. Gold tranche refers to. Now, when you study IMF, WTO, you study the World Bank, right? You would know what gold tranche or reserve tranche, what it is. You should know that IMF is a quota-driven body. It has something called a quota. This quota basically decides the voting power of its members. The quota also decides what is the quantum of assistance that the IMF can grant to a particular member country. Now, every member has to pay its quota. 1/4 of the quota has to be paid in the form of a reserve asset. This reserve asset previously used to be only gold. Now, in fact, gold and dollar. Now, this is gold and SDR. SDR is also a reserve asset created by the IMF itself. So, 25% of your contribution of the quota has to be done in the form of reserve assets. So, if a member country wants assistance from the IMF, it can get 25% of its quota with no conditions imposed by the IMF. If it goes beyond its reserve tranche position, thereafter the IMF is going to give you assistance, but that assistance will come with certain conditions. This is what we call conditional assistance coming from the IMF itself. So what is the reserve tranche position? Reserve tranche is a credit system granted by the IMF to its members, right? Easy. Now let's go for the next question. With reference to the Indian economy, consider the following statements. First one says commercial paper is a short-term unsecured promissory note. Now there is something called commercial paper. there is something called a certificate of deposit. Both of these are money market instruments. That means these are short-term financial instruments. A certificate of deposit is one where you as a person go to a bank, you put your money in the bank and the bank issues you a paper. This paper is going to be called a certificate of deposit. That means this particular financial instrument certifies that you have deposited some money with the bank. It's different from a fixed deposit because a certificate of deposit can also be transferred over. It's a negotiable instrument. You can sell it off in the secondary market also. Now, if the same mechanism is being adopted by a company, then the certificate of deposit is going to be called a commercial paper. A commercial paper is a short-term unsecured promissory note. That means the company is going to take money from you and in exchange is going to give you a promissory note, which is going to be called a commercial paper. Since both of them are money market instruments, quite obviously both of them are short-term. So is commercial paper a short-term unsecured promissory note? Yes. Second one says certificate of deposit is a long-term instrument issued by the RBI to a corporation. This is a wrong statement. A certificate of deposit can be issued by banks, for example, the scheduled commercial banks. You put your money into the bank is going to issue a certificate called the certificate of deposit. It is not being issued by the RBI, right? So second one is obviously wrong. You use 2 to eliminate. D goes, which of these are correct? So D goes and A goes. That means you are stuck with a choice. The choice is between B and C, 4 only and 1 and 3 only. We know that 1 is correct. That means the answer should be C, which is 1 and 3. Third one says call money is a short-term finance used for interbank transactions. Yes, banks face temporary liquidity crisis all the time. Now, when banks face temporary liquidity crisis, they can turn to other banks and borrow money or borrow liquidity for a short amount of time. If you borrow it for a day, it's going to be called call money. You also have something called notice money. You have something called term money, with each having a different maturity date. So is call money is an interbank money market instrument. This is also correct. Fourth one says zero coupon bonds are interest bearing short term bonds issued by scheduled commercial banks to corporations. Now, firstly, zero coupon bonds, the name itself should suggest that these bonds carry no coupon payments. That means the bond will have the name of the issuer written on it, the face value written on it, the coupon payment will be 0. Now, in case of a zero coupon bond, if the face value is 1000, this bond is going to be issued to you at a discount. What is going to be said is this bond is not carrying any coupon. The bond carries a face value of 1000. You can buy it from me at 800 rupees. The zero coupon bond is to be redeemed at the face value upon maturity. That means if the maturity period of the bond is, let's say, 2 years, after 2 years, you're going to get 1000 rupees, not 800 rupees. So are these interest bearing short term bonds? No. The answer is clearly 1 and 3. Go to the next one. With reference to bitcoins, sometimes seen in the news, which of the following statements is or are correct? First one says, bitcoins are tracked by the central banks of different countries. Now remember, this is a question asked in 2016. Bitcoins have been quite a buzz since 2013 onwards. 2016 is when they peaked the most. One thing, even if you don't know what bitcoins means, one thing that you should know about bitcoins is that this is decentralized currency. It is in the control of no monetary authority, no central bank. That was the entire purpose of having bitcoins as an alternate currency. So can it be tracked by the central banks of countries? No, absolutely not. Right? That means 1 definitely is wrong. Wherever you find 1, you have to eliminate. Now the options are B and C, 2 and 3 only, and 3 only. That means 3 has to be correct. 3 says online payments can be sent without either side knowing the identity of the other. For you to make a Bitcoin transfer, you only need to know the wallet address of this person. The wallet address is public, but the wallet address is not directly linked to the identity of the person, which is what makes anonymous transactions in Bitcoins far more of an incentive. Right? So online payments can be sent without either party knowing the identity of the other. This is absolutely correct. And second one says anyone with a Bitcoin address can send and receive Bitcoins from anyone else with a Bitcoin address. Now this is also logically correct, right? Though answer should be B. Now let's move to the next one. What is or are the purposes of the government's sovereign gold bond scheme and the gold monetization scheme? Gold monetization scheme is where you deposit the gold kept at home. This will be converted into a brick and an associated amount will be given to you, right? Eventually you will get your gold back, right, after a certain point in time. A sovereign gold bond scheme. A sovereign gold bond, because it's a sovereign bond, that means it is going to be issued by the government. The whole idea about the sovereign gold bond scheme is that the face value or the coupon payments will be linked to the market price of gold. That means you will buy this bond at a certain face value. The market price upon maturity will be linked. The value that you're going to get after an amount of time will be linked to what is called the market price of gold. So imagine that today 10 grams of gold is rupees 50,000, right? After 10 years, the market price of gold becomes 100,000 per 10 grams of gold. That means if I bought a bond whose prices were linked to gold, after 10 years, I'm going to get double the amount because the face value is being indexed to what? To the prices of market prices of gold as are happening. The intent behind having gold monetization scheme as well as sovereign gold bond scheme was to ensure that India, one, does not import a lot of gold, right? Because this creates a lot of demand for gold. In India, gold has a sentimental value also. Also, gold is a good hedge against inflation. The problem with gold is that gold is a non-productive asset. If I convert my money into a brick of gold, the brick of gold can lie in my, you can say, my locker at my house or in my locker at the bank. But I have put that money away from circulation, right? That is one problem with you investing in gold. The other problem with us investing in gold is that India does not have a lot of gold which is found here. Most of our requirements of gold we have to import. So that creates a balance of payments disequilibrium situation for us also. So we have to worry about those parts. He's saying what are the purposes behind both of these schemes? The first one says to bring the idle gold lying with the Indian households into the economy. Second, this is absolutely correct. Second one is to promote FDI in gold and jewelry sector. Now this is a far-fetched statement, right? Why would you want to get FDI into gold through a gold bond scheme? I mean, it can attract a lot of foreign investors also. That way you can bring foreign investment, but not foreign direct investment, especially in the gold or jewelry sector. Now, this is where gold will be taken away from you by the banks or by the, you can say, or you will be issued securities by the government. What has that got to do with the gold sector or the jewelry sector? In fact, if anything, it's going to reduce the demand of gold, right? So, will it bring in more investment? Definitely FDI can't be the correct answer. So, 2, wherever you find, you can eliminate it. Third one says to reduce India's dependence on gold imports. Both 1 and 3 are the correct objectives. Now, let's move to the next one. This is a question. Now, there are questions going to be on security markets. Let's pick these. First one says, in India, which of the following can trade in corporate bonds and government securities? Insurance companies, pension funds, retail investors. Now, this is a question of 2024, right? You should know this is a question of information. There is no logic you can apply here, right? You may think that retail investors cannot invest in government securities. They can. There is a scheme which is called the Retail Direct Scheme. This scheme has been brought in force by the RBI itself. You can create an account with the RBI and also invest in government securities, their primary issuance. Right? Ordinarily, retail investors were given a chance to buy government securities, but that happened in the secondary markets, not in the primary markets. You could not directly subscribe to government securities issued by the government. Now, after the Retail Direct Scheme, you can subscribe to primary issuance of government securities also. So, in India, 1, 2 and 3, all 3 of them, you can have both them trading in corporate bonds as well as government securities. Insurance companies can get government bonds or can also get corporate bonds. So can pension funds and so can retail investors. The answer is 1, 2 and 3. Consider the following. Which of the above are considered as financial instruments? Now, financial instruments are essentially contracts. These are legal agreements which either create an asset for some person and a corresponding liability on the other person, or which give a future claim on money, or which may give you equity or part ownership of a certain business entity. That's what a financial instrument is. It is a contract. He is asking which of these are considered financial instruments. ETFs, you can think of them as some sort of a mutual fund which invests in multiple, you can say, companies listed on a certain index, right? Invests in a basket of multiple corporations. Currency swap, once again, is a financial instrument which is used amongst entities as well as governments to hedge what is called the currency risk. Once again, a financial instrument. The obvious choice here, what is not a financial instrument, clearly is motor vehicles. So you use 2 to eliminate. This goes. The answer has to be 1 and 3. How can motor vehicles be financial instruments? Now let's move to the next one. Statement 1 says, if the United States of America were to default on its debt, holders of US Treasury bonds will not be able to exercise their claims to receive payments. Now, first thing about this statement we should know is, regardless of it being treasury bonds or any other kinds of bonds, bond is a debt instrument. What do we mean by a debt instrument? Right? That means the government is borrowing money from you. The government is creating a liability unto itself that it has to give you your face value as well as the coupon payment at a future date. That means the government is liable to pay you that money. If the government were to default on its bond, will that mean that you have no right to receive your payments? You of course can go and sue the government. There is a US federal code for settlement of federal claims for this particular matter. So can you not sue the government? Of course you are able to exercise your right, because you lend the money to the government defaulted does not mean that you cannot exercise your right to get this money back. You can sue the government in the court of law. So statement 1 is definitely incorrect. That means both statement 1 and 2 are correct is wrong. Both statements 1 and 2 are correct. This is also wrong. Statement 1 is correct. This is also wrong. Answer clearly has to be D. Second one says the US government debt is not backed by any hard assets but only by the faith on the government. This is absolutely true. Much like internal debt in India, when the government issues a government security, it's not like the government gives you any collateral. The government is directly getting you to lend money to itself based upon your faith in the government's capability to pay you back. There is no collateral involved, right? So, is the government debt not backed by any hard assets? Yes, it's not backed by any hard assets. There's no collateral on offer here. So, the answer is that statement 1 is incorrect, statement 2 is correct. Answer has to be D. We'll move to the next one. Consider the following. Statement 1 says, interest income from deposits in infrastructure investment trusts distributed to their investors is exempted from tax, but the dividend is taxable. Infrastructure investment trusts, you can imagine this to be trusts or a pool of funds. They create a corpus by sourcing funds from many people. The idea here is that those funds will be invested into infrastructure projects and the income will be generated from returns that these infrastructure projects are going to give you. Now, this is a statement of information. Infrastructure investment trusts, both the interest income is taxable. Also, the dividend is taxable, right? In case of InvITs, both the interest income as well as the dividends, both of them are taxable. Now, this was a question based out of current affairs. So, sometimes you may not know current affairs for a previous year, especially for 2023. So, you don't have to sweat a lot here. First one is incorrect. The second one says InvITs are recognized as borrowers under the securitizing under the SARFAESI Act, which is also correct. Now, this is a question based out of current affairs back in the day. Statement 1 is incorrect. Statement 2 is correct. The answer has to be D. You can think of InvITs essentially as some sort of mutual funds, in which case they are sourcing money from a lot of people, investing it into infrastructure projects and giving you income based out of those returns that they generate. Consider the following markets: government bond market, call money market, treasury bill market, stock market. How many of the above are included in capital markets? Now, there is a difference between capital markets versus money markets. The essential difference between the two lies in the term to maturity, or you can say lies in the tenure, which means that money market is going to be dealing in all such financial instruments which are going to mature within a period of 1 year. So, up to 1 year, the instrument, this will be included in the money market. If it is for a period of more than 1 year, then it's going to be a part of the capital markets. Which of these are included in the capital markets? First one says government bond markets. You should know that bond is a debt instrument. So are treasury bills. Treasury bills are debt instruments issued for a period of up to 1 year, while bonds are debt instruments issued by governments for periods more than 1 year. So, government bonds are included in capital markets, while T-bills are included in the money market because of the tenure. Second one says call money market. We just discussed call money is an interbank money market instrument. That means whenever a bank requires funds overnight for a period of 1 day, they're going to ring up another bank and borrow the money at a certain rate, which is going to be called the call money rate. So, call money is an instrument of the money market, not of the capital markets. That means all of the four cannot be the answer. Now remember, even in these kinds of questions, you can still eliminate. I know that call money is not a money market instrument, is not a capital market instrument. So obviously all of the four cannot be correct. T-bills, like I said, T-bills and bonds. Bonds are also called dated government securities. That means the tenure is for a period of more than 1 year. Right? Up to 1 year, it's going to be called T-bills. It's the same instrument, just that the periods are different. T-bills are money market instruments. That means only 3 can also not be correct. Now the answer could be only 1 or only 2. Stock market obviously is a part of capital market. So the answer has to be only 2. In context of finance, the term beta refers to. Now beta is a term which refers to volatility of an instrument. This term is linked, or in fact beta is linked to what is called the Standard & Poor's 500, S&P 500 index. S&P 500 is given a beta value of 1. Beta can have a value of less than 1, it can have a value of more than 1. If it has a value of, imagine, 1.5, it means that the underlying financial instrument is 50% more volatile than S&P 500. Beta is a term which refers to or which is indicative of the volatility of a financial instrument. A numeric value that measures fluctuations of a stock to changes in the overall stock market. Once again, a question based out of current affairs. Answer is D. Move to the next one. With reference to convertible bonds, consider the following statements. Now, what are convertible bonds? Convertible bonds are, of course, debt instruments. But since the name is convertible, that means when you subscribe to a convertible bond, the contract will itself mention that you, whoever is the bond holder, is given the option to convert part or whole of this bond into equity as per a pre-decided conversion ratio. This conversion ratio could be 12:1, right? This conversion ratio could be 4:1. That means one bond could be converted into 4 shares. One bond can be converted into 12 shares. This conversion ratio is pre-decided at the time of the contract itself, right? This is what is called a convertible bond. The question is, as there is an option to exchange the bond for equity, convertible bonds pay a lower rate of interest. Now, this is absolutely correct. The idea here is whenever you subscribe to a bond is going to carry a face value. A bond is also going to carry a fixed coupon payment. The coupon payment may be linked to any other thing, but that is called a variable coupon rate bond. But most of the bonds are going to be fixed coupon bonds. That means it's a fixed income instrument. You already know how much interest money or how much coupon payments you're going to get over the face value. If you are given the option to convert a bond into equity, the prices of equity are normally linked to inflation. That means as the economies witness inflation, you will find that stock prices are one of the commodities in the market. Stock prices are also going to increase. However, when your coupon payment is fixed, that means if the rate of inflation is around the coupon payment or is slightly more than the coupon payment or is very slightly less than the coupon payment, nominally you will get the coupon payment, but in real terms, you will have gotten lesser money. So many people, many bondholders exercise this right to convert the bond into equity at a future date according to the pre-described conversion ratio. Since equity prices are normally linked to inflation, that means if inflation is high in the economy, you will also find that stock prices are rising. That's why these coupon payments give you a lower rate of interest. This is what we call indexation benefits. That means the prices of equity are linked to the index of inflation. You will say there is no rule that links the prices of equity to indices of inflation, but normally you will find, like most things in an inflationary environment, stock prices are also going to increase. This is what is called indexation benefit out of a convertible bond. As there is an option to exchange the bond for equity, convertible bonds pay a lower rate of interest. Yes, normally they pay a lower rate of interest. Second is the option to convert to equity affords the bondholder a degree of indexation to rising consumer prices. Yes, because if you did not have the option to convert it into equity, that means your coupon payments could be fixed. Now, if your coupon payments are giving you an yield of, let's say, a 10%, while inflation is that of 4%, that means in reality, you're not getting a 10%, you're getting less than 10% because of inflation. However, if you convert this bond into number of shares, if you get 12 shares in exchange for this, the prices of those shares would have obviously risen as compared, or you can say in an inflationary environment. Normally that would have been the case. So the answer for this is both 1 and 2. Let's move to the next one. Which of the following activities constitute the real sector in an economy? If you have understood something called the circular flow of income, households, firms, financial markets, government, and the external sector. If you have done this, you would know that there is an exchange. Normally speaking, there are two kinds of exchanges that happen between each agent. One kind of an exchange is a monetary exchange. The other kind of an exchange is the exchange of real items, of actual output. That means the firms will give you goods and services only if you pay them some money called consumption expenditure. Right? Similarly, when you give to the firm factors of production, the firm gives you factor payments back. Right? Which is to say, in the economy, there is one sector which is called the real sector, the other sector is called the financial sector. The financial sector deals either directly in money or in claims of money, or in claims over money, or which is called financial instruments. Money is just a notation, it's a symbolic notation of an actual commodity or of a real commodity. Money itself does not matter. What matters is what the money can buy you. Real output constitutes the real sector of the economy. So if you had a basic idea of real versus financial, you would know which of these is real. Right? Farmers harvesting their crops, you are talking about real input, therefore it's a part of real sector. Textile mills converting raw cotton into fabrics, once again you are talking about real output being produced, actual goods or services being produced, therefore it's a part of the real sector. A commercial bank lending money to trading company, this is a loan. A loan is a financial instrument, or it's a part of the financial sector. Corporate body issuing rupee denominated bonds overseas, once again a financial instrument. So two of them are part of financial sector, two of them are a part of the real sector. He's asking me which of these constitute the real sector in the economy. That means 3 and 4. Wherever we find 3 and 4, the option goes. The answer is A, 1 and 2. Very simple. Indian government bond yields are influenced by which of the following? First one says actions of the United States Fed Reserve. Now Fed Reserve is their equivalent of what we have an RBI for. Fed Reserve can, let's say, induce what is called quantitative easing. Fed Reserve may decide to, let's say, reduce the interest rates. If the Fed Reserve reduces interest rates in the US, imagine that the Fed Reserve has reduced the interest rates to 2%, while interest rates in India are, let's say, 4%. Quite obviously, many of these foreigners who live in the US would look at India as an attractive savings destination, so they can bring in their dollars into the economy. If they bring in their dollars into the economy, right, what is this going to do? They will convert this dollar into rupees. That means they are adding to the money supply. If they are adding to the money supply, that means now there will be a huge corpus of funds from which other agents can borrow money. If there is more money incoming, that means the corpus of funds has increased. That means interest rates in the economy can reduce. Not only do you have domestic savings, you also have money incoming from the rest of the world. The reverse is also true. If the Fed Reserve goes for what is called quantitative tapering, that means the Fed Reserve decides to increase the interest rates in the US, you will witness that there is a flight of capital going to happen from India to the US. Many of these foreign investors are going to take their money away to the US, creating a shortage of funds in this economy, and shortage of funds is going to have an upward pressure on the interest rates in the economy. That means the cost of borrowing may increase. If the cost of borrowing increases or the cost of borrowing decreases, quite obviously, since the government bonds also are a competing instrument for banks, bonds will also have to give you higher or lower yields. So this is dependent on the actions of the United States Fed Reserve. Quite obviously, it will be dependent on the actions of the Reserve Bank of India. If banks are giving you a higher interest rate or a lower interest rate, the bonds are also going to tail. The bonds are also competing for your money. So are the banks. If the bank is offering you a 6%, the government cannot get away by giving you a 2%. The government will have to give you something comparable. That means actions of the Reserve Bank of India, more specifically monetary policy, has an impact on interest rates in the economy. And since interest rates are also linked to bond yields, which is the effective return on bonds, quite obviously this will have an impact on bond yields. The third one says inflation and short-term interest rates. Once again, if there is an inflationary scenario, it will bring the RBI into action. And if the RBI is brought into action, quite clearly, it may have an increase in impact on the bond yields also. So the answer is 1, 2 and 3. We'll move to the next one. Easy questions. With reference to India, consider the following statements. First one says, retail investors through Demat account can invest in T-bills, treasury bills and Government of India debt bonds in the primary market. This is an absolutely correct statement. I have just discussed the name with you. This scheme is called Retail Direct Scheme. The NDSOM, Negotiated Dealing System, Order Matching System, is a government securities trading platform of the Reserve Bank of India. This is also a correct statement. Third one says CDSL, the Central Depository Services Limited, is jointly promoted by RBI and the Bombay Stock Exchange. This is a factually incorrect statement. The CDSL, or which is called the Central Depository Services Limited, is the depository not jointly promoted by RBI and the BSE. It is solely the depository of the BSE, not of the RBI. It is a question based on information. There is a good chance that you may get this question wrong also. So the answer for this question has to be 1 and 2. With reference to foreign direct investment in India, which of the following is considered its major characteristic? First one says it's the investment through capital instruments essentially in a listed company. Now, foreign direct investment is defined, or the technical definition of foreign direct investment is investment made towards capital instruments of a company such that if it's a listed company, the investment makes up for around 10% or more of its paid up equity capital on a fully diluted basis. Or if you are investing in an unlisted Indian company, any investment is going to be called foreign direct investment. So FDI is not necessarily only in a listed company. FDI is also going to happen in an unlisted company. In fact, any foreign investment in an unlisted company is directly going to be called FDI. So the first is wrong. If you know the definition of FDI, you would know that first statement is wrong because it's not just in a listed company, it's also in an unlisted company. Second one says it's a largely non-debt creating capital flow. Yes, it is largely a non-debt creating capital flow. It is an investment that involves debt servicing. No, foreign direct investment is investment made into the capital instruments of a certain company. That means some person is buying equity or ownership in a certain company, not debt servicing. It is the investment made by foreign institutional investors in government securities. No, once again, this is here, he has clearly said FII. So can't be this, can't be this. The option is B. If you know the definition of FDI, you are directly getting the right answer here. Next questions will be a set of questions on public finance, which is budget, taxation, as well as public debt. Let's take up this category now. First one says, with reference to the expenditure made by an organization or a company, which of the following statements are correct? Acquiring new technology is capital expenditure. Now, capital expenditure is expenditure made towards either upgrading your existing physical capital or getting newer physical capital. That means if you are acquiring new technology, it of course will be a part of CAPEX. CAPEX means putting money towards physical capital formation or the upgradation of the existing physical capital. Second one says, debt financing is considered capital expenditure, while equity financing is considered revenue expenditure. Firstly, debt financing is not going to be expenditure. Debt financing is going to be receipt. Debt financing means that you are servicing your requirements by borrowing money, and equity financing means that you get your money by selling your equity. Both of them are not expenditures, both of them are receipts. Debt financing is considered a capital receipt because it creates a liability on you. Similarly, equity financing is also going to be called a capital receipt. It's going to be a non-debt creating capital receipt. So these are not expenditures. So 2 is definitely wrong. That means 2 only cannot be the answer. Both 1 and 2 cannot be the answer. The answer has to be A, which is 1 only. Let's move to the next one. With reference to the Indian economy, consider the following statements. First one says, a share of household financial savings goes towards government borrowings. It's a completely simple question to answer. If you know that normally in a circular flow of income, it is households who will save, the saving is going to go towards the financial market, and one person or one entity which borrows from the financial market is the government. So the government can directly get you to put your money into post office banks, in which case the government is directly borrowing from you. Or you can also subscribe to government securities as are being issued by the government in the open markets. In both cases, your savings, a part of your savings goes towards the government. So this is not wrong. This is absolutely correct. Second one says, dated securities issued at market related rates in auctions form a large component of internal debt. Internal debt would mean that the debt government has raised from internal sources, and in terms of internal sources, debt which has been raised through dated securities. Dated securities will be securities issued by the government for a duration or a tenure of more than 1 year, typically for a duration between 5 to 40 years. Dated securities issued at market rated rates form a large component of the internal debt. Now this is a question of information. 2/3 of India's internal debt is dated securities, which means long-term securities, long-term bonds issued by the government. So this is also a right answer. Now, these are questions you have noticed if you look at these dates since 2022 onwards, in fact 2021 onwards, you have many questions which they are starting to ask you from security markets, from financial markets, from money markets. So the focus has shifted away from banking more towards financial markets, more towards money markets as well as the capital market instruments, right? So you have to also be ready for this change in trend. Let's move to the next one. Which of the following effects of the creation of black money in India has been the main cause of worry to the government of India? Remember, the question is which is the main cause of worry. That means many of these could be a cause of worry for the government of India, right? Which of these is the main cause of worry? What is black money? You have to remember that black money is money which is unaccounted for. That means authorities do not have any information on this kind of money. Money over which people are not disclosing their source or disclosing transactions happening in this money to the government. Can black money be diverted towards resources to the purchase of real estate and investment in luxury housing? Yes, in fact, black money is one of the many reasons as to why real estate sector in India does not correct itself. You find that property rates in India, typically, especially in tier 1 cities, you will find them on the higher side and always on the higher side. The reason, one of the bigger reasons, is that a lot of black money gets invested into these real estate projects. Is that a cause of worry for the government? Yes, it is, of course, because it is inflationary. The second one says investment in unproductive activities, for example, luxury items, jewelry, gold, precious stones. Once again, yes, because you are putting this money into unproductive use. C says large donations to political parties and growth of regionalism. Yes, criminalization of politics. One of the factors behind criminalization of politics is because money or expenditure, a high amount of expenditure is required in elections, and the ECI, the Election Commission of India, has an expenditure limit on its candidates, which is why they use a lot of cash transactions. A lot of black money flows into elections also, which has eventually led to criminalization also. D says loss of revenue to the state exchequer due to tax evasion. Now, this black money by definition is money that authorities don't know about. It's an unaccounted form of money. That means people are conducting transactions while the authorities don't know about it, which is why they are evading a lot of taxes. A lot of transactions done in cash formats. Quite obviously, D is the most or the biggest cause of worry for the government. Others are also causes of worry, but the biggest cause of worry is definitional. That means if there is money which is floating around that I don't even know about, that means all those people who are using this black money are not paying taxes to the government, which is a bigger problem for the government itself. In fact, in India, roughly around 7 crore people file their income tax returns, 70% of which are zero tax returns. That means they show a tax liability of zero. So you can imagine that tax evasion is the biggest cause of worry with respect to the black money. We'll move to the next one. In context of the Indian economy, first one says non-financial debt includes which of the following? You should know definitionally what does non-financial debt mean. Non-financial debt means debt owed by institutions or entities which are not financial institutions. That means households, you can talk about firms which are not in the financial sector, or even the government for that matter. That is what is called non-financial debt. First one says housing loans owned by households. Yes, because these are being owned by households and households are not a part of the financial sector. Amounts outstanding on credit cards, because this is money owed by normal people, right? This is also a part of non-financial debt. Third one is treasury bills, because this is owed by the government itself. Treasury bills are issued by the government. Households, firms, and governments, we are considering them as a part of not the financial sector, right? Hence, their debt is going to be called non-financial debt. The answer is D, 1, 2, and 3. We'll move to the next one. With reference to India's decision to levy an equalization tax of 6% on online advertisement services offered by non-resident entities, which of the following statements is or are correct? This is about what is called the equalization levy, also popularly called the Google tax. The idea is many of those companies which are not registered or incorporated in India may derive their source of income from Indian sources. For example, if a Facebook sells you ads in the country, right? Since Facebook has been paid by an Indian resident, but Facebook will show it as an income in the US. So Facebook will pay a tax on its income to the US government. The government decided to impose an equalization levy. The idea was we are going to tax their revenue in India itself. The rationale behind this was that you are generating your income from Indian sources, and hence you should be liable to pay taxes in this country itself, right? Because all the other parties which are generating income from our country, right, they are paying income taxes here itself, right? So you will also have to face an equal amount of levy. This is called the equalization levy. Now, this is a concept since 2016. It's still in the news many times. First one says it is introduced as a part of the Income Tax Act. No changes were made to the Income Tax Act. In fact, it was introduced as a part of the Finance Act 2016. And you can see the question was asked in 2018 itself. But this was in the news more recently. It almost is in news every year. Introduced as a part of the Income Tax Act? No, as a part of the Finance Act. That means one only cannot be correct. Both 1 and 2 cannot be correct. Second one says non-resident entities that offer advertisement services in India can claim a tax credit in their home country under the DTAs, Double Taxation Avoidance Agreements. Now, many countries enter into double taxation avoidance agreements. That means if you have been taxed once already, you should not be taxed again, right? The core concern around equalization levy is essentially this. Equalization levy does not come under your DTAA agreements. That means we are going to tax your incomes here. You will also have to pay your income tax in the home country as well. So this has been a major bone of contention. So can they get some credit, tax credit? No, they cannot. The answer is neither 1 nor 2. We'll move to the next one. Consider the following statements. First one says tax revenue as a percent of GDP has steadily increased in the last decade. Second one says fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP has steadily increased in the last decade. Now, these used to be very popular types of questions back in the day. Right? These are questions based on trend lines, and typically UPSC used to have some hint in the statement itself, which used to be an extreme statement. Once he says tax revenue as a percentage of GDP in India has steadily increased, that means today tax as a percentage of GDP is 4%, next year tax as a percentage of GDP is more than 4, the next year it's going to be more than this year, right? Has it steadily increased in the last decade? This question was asked in 2017, that means 10 years back, so somewhere around 2007 to 2017. Now 2008 is where you have the global financial crisis. Although the GFC did not impact India as significantly, but yes, there was some amount of, you can say, repercussions for India too. So probably growth would have suffered. Consequently, tax as a percentage of GDP could have also suffered. Similarly, between 2008 till about 2012, great time period for India. In fact, till about 2012, significant amount of growth shown by the Indian economy. So there could have been a chance that yes, tax as a percentage of GDP may have increased, right? But in 2017, we witnessed a wholesale paradigmatic shift by us introducing the GST, right? GST also led to some amount of decline in the tax collection basis. Since then, it has steadily increased. So the thing that you have to pick up on is this word, steadily increase. That means year on year, it's only showing an increase. Now, for an economy as big as India, for anything to steadily increase or to steadily decrease, it would be an outlier case. This is an extreme statement and is also wrong. Second one says fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP has steadily increased in the last decade. Now, one thing about fiscal deficit, even if you don't know the trend lines or the numbers, you should know that around fiscal deficit, we have this legislation which is called the FRBM, Fiscal Responsibility and Budgetary Management Act, which seeks to bring or reduce the fiscal deficit on an year-on-year basis. So how can that have steadily increased? Like it could have increased in one or the other years, but could it have steadily increased? Since 2005, we have the FRBM Act, and obviously, is it going to steadily increase if the fiscal deficit? Of course, there may be some years where it may increase, but steadily, absolutely not. So commonsensically also, if you think about it, 2 though is definitely wrong. That means the answer is neither 1 nor 2. You move to the next one. There has been a persistent budget deficit. Budget deficit means that the total expenditure exceeds your total receipts. That means the capital expenditure plus your revenue expenditure minus capital receipts plus revenue receipts, there is a positive value here, which is called your budget deficit. Which action can reduce the deficit? Anything that can reduce this part will reduce your deficit, or increase this part will reduce your, decrease this part will reduce your deficit. Either you have to increase this or you have to decrease this. Capital expenditure, revenue expenditure, either this has to decrease or receipts have to increase. That is how your deficit will be brought down. Reducing revenue expenditure, yes, if you reduce revenue expenditure, this value will decrease. So this is correct. Introducing new welfare schemes. Now, if you introduce new welfare schemes, that means your revenue expenditure will definitely increase. Welfare schemes typically will be a part of revenue expenditure. If you increase revenue expenditure, that means the deficit will also increase. That means wherever you find 2, you have to eliminate it. You now have a choice between A and C, 1 only and 1 and 3 only. That means 1 is absolutely correct. You have to look at 3. 3 says rationalizing subsidies. That means cutting down or trimming subsidies. If you trim subsidies down, that means your expenditure will also be brought down. So the budget deficit will be reduced. Therefore, the answer would be 1 and 3 only. 4.1 says reducing import duty, and if you reduce import duty, your receipt part is going to reduce. So the deficit is going to increase. Very simple question. We'll pick the next one. Which of the following is or are included in the capital budget of the Government of India? Now remember, capital budget will include 2 things: capital receipts, capital expenditure. Capital receipts are such receipts which either create, or you will say increase liabilities, or reduce assets. And capital expenditure is expenditure which either decreases liabilities or increases our assets. He's asking you which of these would be included in the capital budget of the Government of India. Very simple question to answer. First one says expenditure on the acquisition of assets such as roads, buildings, machinery. Now this is expenditure which is creating assets for you, increasing your assets. That means it will be a part of the capital budget. Second one says loans received from foreign governments. Loans are going to increase your liabilities because you'll have to pay this money back. So this is a capital receipt, a debt creating capital receipt. Third is loans and advances granted to the states or union territories. This will be a part of your increase in assets. If you are giving loans away, that means these states will have to pay you back in the future alongside with some interest. That means you are increasing your assets. All 3 of them will be a part of your capital budget. We'll move to the next one. With reference to FSDC, Financial Stability and Development Council, consider the following statements. Now, this council was set up on the recommendations of Raghuram Rajan. The idea was what has been mentioned in the name, Financial Stability and Development Council, to look at the work of major conglomerates in the country, as well as to have better intra-agency coordination with respect to regulatory authorities in the financial institution space. That was the objective. Now this was, if I'm not mistaken, this was created in the year 2010. Is it an organ of the Niti Aayog? Niti Aayog was itself created in 2015. How can this be the organ of the Niti Aayog itself? So this one is wrong. You eliminate. Now you have a choice between 3 only and 2 and 3 only. That means 3 has to be correct. You have to look for 2. 2 says it is headed by the Union Finance Minister. This is a correct statement. It's a statement of fact. So you may know it, you may not know it. Third is it monitors macro-prudential supervision of the economy, which is correct. It also tries to ensure better regulatory coordination between multiple regulatory authorities, SEBI, PFRDA, IRDAI, as well as the RBI. So this is the correct answer, right? 2 and 3. A statement or an information-based question. With reference to the 14th Finance Commission, which of the following statements is or are correct? The Finance Commission is a constitutional body. You should know that its role is towards vertical devolution as well as horizontal devolution. First one says, it has increased the share of states in the central divisible pool from 32 to 42%. Now, this is a question back in the day, was also a current affairs based question. This was witnessed that they had increased, the 14th Finance Commission had increased the share of states from the central divisible pool up to 42%. This was correct. Second is, it has made recommendations concerning sector specific grants. Now, sector specific grants were introduced not by the 14th Finance Commission but by the 13th Finance Commission. Now, remember, this is a question that you will not know an answer to, because this is a question which relates to a time period back in the day, some 10 years back from today itself. So, you may not know this already, but it's a good thing that you are looking at these questions and the kind of questions that they are asking. The answer is 1 only. With reference to the union government, consider the following statements. First one says, the Department of Revenue is responsible for the preparation of union budget that is presented to the parliament. Now, this is a very, very simple statement. You should know that the Department of Revenue will concern itself with taxation. Which department prepares the budget? It is the Department of Economic Affairs, the DEA, not the Department of Revenue. So, this is correct. This is incorrect. You use 1 to eliminate, you eliminate D, you eliminate A. That means you are left with a choice between B and C. 2 and 3 only, 2 only. That means 2 has to be correct. You have to look for 3. Statement 3 says, all the disbursements are made from the public account also need the authorization from the Parliament of India. Now, government's funds are categorized across 3 accounts, the Consolidated Fund of India, Contingency Fund, as well as the public account. Public account is where the government serves as the custodian of other people's money. That means it's not the government's money, the government is the custodian of other people's money. Right? For you to make any withdrawals or deposits into the public account, you don't need any authorization from the parliament. While if you want to do the same with the Consolidated Fund of India, you will need to pass what is called an appropriation bill also. Right? So that means all the disbursements made from the PSC public account also need the authorization of the parliament? Absolutely not. They don't need the authorization of the parliament. That means wherever you find 3 is incorrect. The answer has to be 2 only. No amount can be withdrawn from the Consolidated Fund of India without the authorization of the parliament. Yes, no fund can be appropriated without you passing the appropriation bill. Second one is correct. A decrease in tax to GDP ratio of a country indicates which of the following. Now, tax to GDP ratio would mean taxes collected upon the GDP. A decrease in this ratio, because it's a ratio, a decrease in this ratio would mean what? It would mean either GDP is increasing while the taxes remain constant or they are decreasing, or the GDP is decreasing itself while the taxes are increasing, right? Or they may stay constant for that matter. If taxes increase and GDP decreases, this is going to lead to an increase in the tax to GDP ratio. A decrease would be caused if the numerator declines or the numerator increases, or both happen at the same time. Now, does this include slowing economic growth rate? Will there be a tax to GDP decline if the GDP increases while taxes stay the same? Theoretically, yes, but that's not how tax to GDP works. In context of taxes and GDP, you have to understand this thing which is called tax elasticity. Taxes and GDP have a strong positive correlation. That means as GDP increases, taxes also change. Taxes also normally increase. Similarly, as GDP decreases, taxes also normally decrease. This is related to what is called the tax elasticity of an economy. An associated concept is called tax buoyancy, which is a different concept than tax elasticity. Tax elasticity means the change in one variable, which is taxes, subject to change in another variable, which in this case is GDP. If GDP increases, normally you will find that the correlation between taxes and GDP is on the positive side. That means you will also witness the tax collection being higher. If GDP declines, the tax collection will also be lower in that case. Right? So, slowing economic growth rate, not necessarily. Second one says, okay, so is the first, so slowing economic growth rate, yes. The second one says less equitable distribution of national income. Now, is it going to be a less equitable distribution of national income? Here you have to consider when you say tax to GDP, tax does not mean only the direct tax. Tax also means indirect taxes, and indirect taxes are paid by everyone. So does the total amount or the aggregate amount of taxes collected also automatically tell you who gave you the most amount of taxes? It could be that the indirect taxes are more than the direct taxes, or the direct taxes are more than the indirect taxes. The tax to GDP ratio does not reflect on that part. So less equitable distribution of income, it may be the case, it may not be the case. It does not necessarily have to be less equitable distribution of national income. That means 2 is incorrect. The answer has to be 1 only. Let's move to the next one. Which of the following statements or situations best reflects indirect transfers often talked about in the media recently with reference to India? Now, once again, this is a question based on current affairs. The idea here, indirect taxation, indirect transfers, refers to 2 cases, the Kane Energy case as well as the Vodafone case, where what happened was that ownership of an Indian company, which was SR in this case, it was transferred to a company based out of Cayman Islands, and Vodafone happened to have acquired the other company which was located in Cayman Islands. Now, Cayman Islands gives you a lot of taxes, a lot of, you can say, equity, right, while you avoided taxation in the country, right? This is called an indirect transfer of ownership of an Indian asset, right, given it away to a foreign entity, but done indirectly. It was not acquired directly, because if they had acquired it directly, right, or if they had sold off those assets directly in India, they would have to pay taxes to the Indian authorities. They evaded taxes because of this, right? This is what the Vodafone case is most known for. A foreign company transfers shares, and such shares derive substantial value from assets located in India. If you were a habitual reader of current affairs around this time, you would automatically know what this is in reference to. Consider the following items. Which of the above items is or are exempted under the GST? First one says cereal grains hulled, chicken eggs cooked, fish processed and canned, newspapers containing advertising material. Now, this is a question which was asked in 2018. GST was introduced in 2017. Quite obviously, it was current affairs then. It's a complete question based on information. You may know this, you may not know this. So, I mean, you don't have to sweat over not knowing this question. Canned products, right? Processed fish, canned fish is not GST exempted. That means wherever you find 3 has to be eliminated. The answer has to be 1, 1, 2 and 4. The answer is 1, 2 and 4. Back in the day, these are all exempted under GST, because the first 2 related to basic food articles, and newspapers you did not want to tax because the government does not want to be seen as an authority which quells the freedom of speech. So newspapers which carry advertisements, newspapers which do not carry advertisements, they were all GST exempted. What is or are the most likely advantages of implementing the goods and services tax? It's a very, very basic question, right? One of the advantages is to eliminate cascading effect. The other advantage is to eliminate double taxation. Now, both of these are advantages of what is called a value-added taxation system, and GST is also a value-added tax. That is one advantage. The other major advantage was that it subsumed multiple tax rates. Center had the power of taxing production. The states majorly had the power of taxing what is called sale, right? Both of these were included in what is called the supply of goods and services, and the supply of goods and services is being taxed. Multiple tax rates were included, or you can say brought down into a few tax slabs, 5%, 12%, 18%, 28%, 0 also for that matter, right? It will replace multiple taxes collected by multiple authorities and thus create a single market in India. This is absolutely correct. This was the main objective. It will drastically reduce current account deficit of India and will enable it to increase its foreign exchange reserves. Firstly, will it have an impact on the current account deficit of India? If you avoid what is called the cascading effect, and if you avoid what is called double taxation, because GST is a value-added tax, that means eventually the consumers are going to benefit. If the consumers benefit because of lower prices, quite obviously your goods may become price competitive. But will it drastically reduce the current account deficit in India? If your goods become comparatively cheaper because of tax rates being simplified now and rationalized, quite obviously they will become price effective or more competitive. But is it going to drastically reduce the current account deficit of India? Not necessarily. It will enormously increase the growth and size of the economy of India and will enable it to overtake China in the near future. Now, if taxation, effectively taxation per product or per item reduces because of the introduction of GST, that means yes, our output may become more competitive and the firms, or you can say there will be lesser burden on consumers. Quite obviously, the demand may also increase, the growth may also be witnessed. But when he uses words like enormously, drastically, he is himself telling you to eliminate these options because these are extreme statements. Can't be 3, can't be 2. The answer is 1 only. Okay. Fair enough. Now we have questions based out of agriculture. What is the time right now? The time is almost 8. So what we can do is we can take agriculture, industry and external sector in the next segment, which is going to be the part 3 of this discussion, which is going to be another 1.5 hours or maybe 2 hours of discussion, and that is how we'll end these 10 years of previous year's question papers. One thing you would have noticed is whenever you're solving for previous year's question papers, especially UPSC's previous year's question papers, try to apply yourself. You may not know all the exact information at all points in time, but UPSC's questions typically have some hints given within these questions itself. You should be able to apply yourself and make a reasonable or an informed guess. All right. So with that said, I will leave for the day. We'll continue this discussion in the last and the final part, which is going to be part 3, where we'll be taking up agriculture, industry, most importantly external sector, and then some allied questions here and there. See you guys.